Greetings, I'm Luca Jones from Luca Sprues. I'm here at Tectonic Hobbies to have a little look at two of our 1/72nd scale Airfix model kits. We have the relatively recent Airfix Spitfire Mark 5C and the AZ Model Spitfire Mark 9C. So we're going to be having a little look at these kits and comparing the two in terms of price and what you get in the kit, and talking you a little bit through some of the details about them. Alright, so we'll start off with the Airfix version of the Spitfire in the form of the Mark 5C. So this is the early Mark 1 airframe with the Merlin 45 engine and the 20mm cannons, and since this is a tropical version, you've also got the nice large radiator with the dust filter. So it's a nice box art of a American Lend-Lease Spitfire in North Africa, bombing a couple of, they look like German trucks, and I think that's a Panzer III and a Panzer IV. So some pretty nice box art, a little bit of action going on, that's always nice to see. And you've got the two schemes in this kit, so you've got the British one, which I'll have a look here, they say where they're from. The number 2nd Squadron South African Air Force, and on the box art and the other scheme is the 307th Fighter Squadron from the 12th Air Force, the United States. So that's in Algeria in 1942. So yeah, very nice looking box. You've got the art on the front, you've got the history of the Mark V and the marking schemes, you've got the paints, and you've got the Airfix flying hours. If you're a member of their club, you can tally these up and send them back to Airfix and get a free kit. And you've got skill level number 2, so it's yeah, it's not quite for beginners, they're saying, but a little bit too easy to be more advanced. But I think they also offer the beginner's version of this with simplified parts, and it's a different build for beginners, so it should be a bit easier. Then you've just got some warnings on the bottom and the barcodes, and nothing on the back. So let's open this up. We'll just open it up using a knife to cut the tape, and then you just simply pull the box lid off. So let's have a look at what we've got. So you've got your gun sight here, and you've got two versions of the canopy, one that is in the closed position and another with the pieces separate, so you could have it in the open position. So that's nice. It's always good to have a little spare canopy in case. Okay, and we'll start with this sprue. So it looks like we've got some of the landing gear, the interior details, which comes separately molded from the two fuselage halves, which is different. We've got options for 2 propellers here, rest of the landing gear, 2 different seat types, and part of the frames. So details don't look too bad on this one. Some nicely molded instruments on the panel there, and some decent sidewall detailing. Landing gear looks all good as far as I can tell for a Spitfire. Okay, so let's move on to the next frame. So this has your floor for the cockpit just here, so that's not too badly detailed. You've got your rudder pedals, oxygen tanks, and the throttle quadrant and the yoke, so that's a fair bit more detail, I think, than the original Mark 1 Spitfire kit, which is still out there. You've got a nice little part figure, always good to have one of those. And you've got spinners for 2 different versions. This one's a bit of a longer nose and a shorter one, and that's obviously for the propellers as well. Here you have the large tropical radiator attached to the front cowling there, so that comes in 2 halves, and the normal cowling for the Spitfire. Some spare VHF antennas, and these look like radiators of some kind. Here you've got the extended fuel tank, which is like a large bulge that fits underneath the aircraft if you've got fuel tank extensions. 2 types of exhausts there, that's interesting. That one's got a funny little thing sticking out there. Haven't seen that before. And your other larger radiators for the bottom of the wing, and the smaller one for the other side, I think, or is that the central one? I think it's the center one, and that's your radiator flap. So yeah, that's not too bad, nicely detailed, especially on the pilot figure there and the controls on the floor. And here we have the wings. So we've got the horizontal stabilizers for the back, and we've got these wings. These are obviously the longer ones with that famous elliptical shape, and you can see that bulge in there for the cannons. So it's all the kind of modern stuff for a model kit. You've got the sunken details, so they're all looking pretty nice, and a couple of the raised details, they look pretty good. The horizontal stabilizers are all one piece, but the rudder isn't, so you can pose that quite easily. These ones might need to be cut off if you're wanting to pose them. No flaps, I'm afraid, and the ailerons are also pre-made in that position. So yes, alright, that's those parts. And finally we have the fuselage halves and the clipped version of the Spitfire's wings. So that's a nice inclusion if you wanted to do a different version. Yeah, so pretty similar to the Mark 1, except there are a few differences. Overall it's looking pretty good. Some of these details are molded on the inside, but yeah, so that's a little bit different. But the rest obviously slot into here. So yeah, looks pretty nicely done. So let's have a look at the instructions. We've got the decals just here, which we'll have a look at in a second. So starting off with, you've got the description of the Spitfire, a little bit of its history, and you've got its specifications, so that's pretty good. So assembly obviously starts with the cockpit. So as you can see, it's very different to the normal type, where you've actually got the sidewalls and you build all the cockpit separately and then attach it to the two fuselage halves rather than being one piece. So it looks like they've done a fair bit to improve it over the original Mark 1 Spitfire, which looks pretty nice. You got your usual decals, but you can probably hand paint those if you prefer to do it that way. And the Humroll color guide as usual for Airfix. So yeah, that's a little bit different. I actually haven't built a model kit where you assemble the cockpit like that, but looks like they've gotten some extra details in, so that's a win in my books. Okay, so details look all nice, and then you actually attach it to the fuselage as a separate piece, then you join those two together, and you got your spinner so you can get the prop to rotate, but you could put a little engine in there if you wanted the motor to run, or like flick a switch and the propeller will spin. Then you got the wings, so you've actually got some extra depth that you have to add in by way of these extra pieces. At this stage you'd be drilling holes out if you want to add that extended fuel tank. And the wing halves join together. Then you put the rudder horizontal stabilizer onto the fuselage. You join up the radiator for the tropical version. And you add the cannon parts. So you've got an option to have 4 cannons or just the 1. And then you add on your radiators and the landing gear, which has the option to be retracted or extended. Slap that fuel tank on if you want it, and the exhaust. So I've got 2 different types of exhaust, which is interesting, and 2 different types of propeller and different hubs, so that's interesting. Then you've got your pitot tube and the pilot, and then the clear parts. So obviously you've got that option to have the canopy open, which is a nice touch. And here we have the markings. So yep, as I said, the Lend-Lease one. You can even see where the roundels would have been painted over, which is a nice little feature on this scheme. And you've got sharp teeth, so that's quite an interesting one. And also the British one, well, the South African Air Force one, with the British kind of standard markings for the theatre. So yeah, that's interesting. And then we've got the decals. So these decals are printed by Cartograph, so you can expect them to be really good. They look quite nice looking there. They've got pretty good quality, some very nice details for the cockpit, and then your common markings and the separate markings for the US and the South African colour scheme. Okay, and now we have the AZ Model Spitfire Mark 9C. So the main difference with this one is the better engine, so the Merlin 60 and Merlin 70 series, and the 4-bladed propeller. You've also got twin radiators underneath the wings. Otherwise it's pretty much identical to the Mark 5. So that's the general differences. I'm not a Spitfire expert, I'll admit, so there's probably a lot more subtle ones. But that's the main difference for those of you who are wondering. So this box has got some quite nice box art. 2 Spitfires, one in a very eye-catching silver finish that you don't usually see, and another Spitfire in the regular camouflage of the time. flying along. Looks like a desert-ish landscape, so maybe it's Italy or North Africa. So some nice box art there. On this side we've got some more of AZ Models kits, and then we've got the warnings on this side. And on the back of the box we've got a few different colour schemes, so I'll have to turn that around so I can have a read of them. So we've got the silver one, which is so that is Spitfire UFQ MJ250 from 601 Squadron. So that's from Italy, 1944. Aircraft in natural metal finish, probably for testing. So that's quite an eye-catching colour scheme there. You could have a lot of fun with modulating panel colours on that one. And here we have plane in desert camo scheme, note name Pat below the cockpit. So that's a Spitfire from number 72 Squadron, Algeria, 1943. So that's quite nice. A plane finished in high altitude scheme but with normal markings. So that's the kind of greyish bluey colour. This one's number 94 Squadron from Egypt, 1944. And here we have the standard fighter day scheme with a black spinner from Italy, 1943. So you got quite a nice wide range of different markings. So this one's just quite easily slide open, and you've got all the parts in quite a compact little thing here. So we'll open this one up. Okay, so we'll start off like we did with the Airfix one with the clear parts. So looks like you've only got the one, and that's the canopy frame just here. So it looks quite good still. Just a single piece, so if you wanted to open this aircraft up, you'd probably have to buy another canopy or vacuum forms or use a spare. So, but still not bad. That's some very nice clear parts there. Well, part. And we've got the first set of sprues. Looks like you got some quite nice, once again it's engraved panel lines, but you got a fair bit more I think than the Airfix one. So some nice details there. That looks pretty good. We got some radiators, they're quite nicely detailed as well. The rudder fin, so we've got two versions of the rudder fin, the sharper kind of pointy one and a different one here. Two sets of elevators, I suspect they're slightly different as well. Parts for the landing gear, these look like the bulges for the cannon ammunition. We got the four-bladed propeller. Here's your gun sight, so it's molded in grey plastic like the rest of the aircraft. Single seat here, and we got the cannons there, and here is the cockpit floor. So all quite nice details, looking by the looks of things. So that should do quite nicely, I'd say. Obviously you've also got some exhaust there, so that's all good. And now we've got the second and final frame. So we've got the upper portion of the wing. These are obviously the clipped version, but what they've done is they've also got the extensions for that elliptical shape. And we've got the two radiators here. Looks like two different types of landing gear. So that's interesting. Very similar, you got some nice raised dials and instruments on the cockpit panels. And yeah, very nice engraved details on the aircraft fuselage halves and on the upper surface of the wings. So that's pretty nice to a good standard, I'd say. And we'll move on to the decals here. So I don't know who does these ones. They don't have any logo on them. So I'll have to, by the looks of things, they're quite nicely detailed. If you have a look there, you got some good detailing. In terms of the print quality, it's pretty good. So I'd have to give them a little test to see if they're as good as the Cartograph ones. It's pretty hard to beat. But overall, in terms of the detail, they look quite nice. So that's your common markings. And then for this kit, you've got all of them are British schemes, but they're quite varied in terms of the camouflage used, or lack of, on some of them. So yeah, they look quite decent. Looks like the gloss might be a little bit worn on some parts of these decals when I hold them to the light. But I'll have to test them out and see if they hold to standard. So moving on, we've got the instructions. So we've got the history of the Mark 9 Spitfire there, and a layout of the two sprues, which is nice. And you've got the color guide. Once again, it's in Humbrol. So starting out, These ones have colours, obviously, showing which colours you paint and what parts you remove. So that's quite a nice use of colour coding there. So a very nice detailed guide on the colours to paint the aircraft panels. No decals included, so if you're a fan of the decals for cockpits, that's tough luck on that one, I think. So yeah, you assemble the cockpit flooring and some of the panels for the bulkheads. Looks like there's a fair few options here if you want to change versions of the Spitfire for things like head cushions. So that's interesting, they go into that detail. Then you've got the two fuselage halves, so unlike the Airfix one there, actually the details for the cockpit are engraved into the halves for the fuselage and you paint them while they're separate. So yeah, that's a bit more common for most kits, but still looks like they've got some pretty nice details. I don't think I gave you a very good look, but you can have a look and see the cockpit detailing on the inside of those fuselage halves, so they're pretty good. Then you move on, after you've joined the fuselage halves, to the wing halves. So you've got another kind of extension piece there to make the wheel wells deeper. Then you got a fair few versions of armament and wings, depending on which version you're doing. So that's quite a few options there. You got the Mark 9C and the Mark 9E. So that's changing. Looks like it's mainly a change of armament, and then optional wing tips. Then you've got the radiators. So you've got different versions for the Mark 9E. So that's drilling out holes for some pieces, I believe. And or that might be sanding. They've got a nice ooh, okay, so that is not quite sure what that means. I haven't seen that. I understand these ones. A little bit confusing, but at least it's relatively well laid out. Just got to learn what all the symbols mean. So yeah, that's nice that you've got all those options there. Then you assemble the landing gear and the radiators, and that's the wing done. Bring the wing to the lower section of the fuselage. The propeller's there. By the looks of things, the propeller won't spin. Obviously you could modify it if you wanted it to. And then you join the canopy. Nice inclusion. They've got the mirror there. And then you've got the optional parts here, depending on which version of the Spitfire you're doing, for the tail and the elevator. And the final step here is attaching the wing, the landing gear. Obviously options to have the landing gear retracted or extended. And here are your common stencil markings, so that's nice that they've included it on a separate page. And they're quite clearly laid out, so yeah, you can easily see where everything goes and the positioning. So those instructions are quite nice. A lot more compact than the Airfix one, but I think provided you have a very careful read and maybe use a pencil to mark out what you're doing, that looks like it'll be quite easy to do. So which kit should you buy? Well, that really kind of depends on what version of the Spitfire you want to make. If you want a Mark 5, obviously you get the Mark 5, and if you want the Mark 9, you get the Mark 9. But outside of that, if you're looking at these two kits in terms of how they're built and their pros and cons, it's a little bit tricky to decide. They've both got different kind of features. So, with the Airfix Spitfire, it retails at $24.95, and the AZ Model retails at $29.95. So, if you're really conservative on price, the Airfix Spitfire is slightly cheaper, but it's only a small margin. The Spitfire kit looks like it's got a fair few spares. They both do, but this kit has a few more. For example, you've got an entirely different set of wings, whereas on this kit, the wings, you actually add parts, but it's the same set of wings, if that makes sense. I think you can go back and have a look in the video, but with this, the Mark 5 for the clip wings, you've got a separate top section, whereas with the Mark 9 kit by AZ, you've got just the extension, so you'd build it with the clip wings, and then if you want to extend them out, you add the extensions on. The Spitfire, the Airfix kit builds a little bit differently, as you saw, with the cockpit being a separate piece that you then attach into the fuselage halves. So that might make assembly somewhat easier. The details otherwise looked pretty much identical. If anything, this had a few more details in terms of engravings for the panel lines. However, once again, they're slightly different versions of the Spitfire, so that might just actually be a detailing thing. I can vouch for the decals on the Airfix one being very good. These ones, they still look pretty good, but I haven't actually used them. But Most decals are pretty good. There are very few kit companies, I think, that have really appalling decals, but there are a couple out there. One advantage of this is obviously you've got the spare canopy parts, so if you screw up one set, you've got the other. Otherwise, if you want the aircraft open to show you nice cockpit details, you've also got that option, whereas with this one you don't, which is a bit of a shame. And if you're after more Spitfire parts, these could be good because you've got some more spares. So if, say, you're building a large number of Spitfire Mark 5s and you need some extra parts, this is probably the way to go. But overall, they look like really quite nice kits. Good attention to detail, the decals look alright, and the instructions are not bad. Airfix do offer the Mark 1 Spitfire, which retails at $21 at Tectonic Hobbies. Obviously, again, it's a different version of Spitfire, and it's also an older tooling. I would say this Mark 5 is definitely a noticeable improvement over the earlier Airfix Spitfires, which were already pretty good, but this, I think, takes it to the new level with the extra canopy parts, the extra detailing on the cockpit, and just in general, there's a few other little details, and this is a much more refined kit, I think, than the Mark 1. AZ Model have quite a large range of Spitfires as well. You can basically get any version from the Mark 1 all the way up to the Mark 22, I believe. Whereas Airfix only have the Mark 1/2, the Mark 5, and the Mark 22 in 72nd scale at the moment. You've also got more decal options with this AZ Models kit, whereas this one it's only 2 different decal schemes, and they're both pretty much identical. They're the North African kind of desert camo. Whereas this one, you've got a lot more variety. So if you're after some interesting color schemes, I'd definitely go with the AZ Model ones. Overall, I'd say both really good kits. Depends on what you want, but they've got different things to offer. So yeah, it's good to have them in the Tectonic Hobbies inventory at the moment. And if there are any particular versions of the Spitfire you need, you can always just come up to the front desk here and ask us, and we'll order in pretty much anything we can get our hands on, including other versions of the AZ model. So at the moment, we've only got this Mark 9C kit in stock at the moment, but we have access to the rest of the range, so we can order more in if they prove to be popular. And we've got the Mark 1 and the Mark 22 of the Airfix Spitfires available as well. And we can also order more of those in. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for having a watch of this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, and check out my Patreon page, link in the description. And a special shout out to my current patrons, Archie Palmer, Joan Moss, J&K Jones, and Emo, who have been absolutely wonderful the last few months, helping me get a little bit of extra income. And yeah, if you're interested in model kits and you live on the Sunshine Coast, come down to Tectonic Hobbies. Like I said, we're happy to order in pretty much any model kit you want. So that can be quite dangerous to your bank account if you're not careful. Hopefully we'll be doing a video where I actually build these kits in the future. But until that day, take care and model on.